bringing you the facts with the precision of AI and the judgment of real journalists. This is Neural Newscast.
Get ready for a Neural Newscast deep dive. I'm Andrew, your host specialist, and with me is Thomas Bignot, our history correspondent. Let's dig into today's topics. On this day in 1862, President Abraham Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that enslaved people in Confederate states would be freed effective January 1, 1863. A pivotal step toward ending slavery in America during the Civil War.
That single declaration carried enormous weight, Andrew. As a preliminary measure, it set a clear federal date when freedom would legally arrive for those enslaved in the Confederate States.
Right, and coming in the middle of the Civil War, it wasn't just moral rhetoric. It was a strategic, consequential act that changed the war's character and its aims.
Exactly. It reframed the conflict as not only a fight to preserve the Union, but a decisive move toward ending slavery in America.
The specificity, naming that Confederate-held enslaved people would be freed effective January 1, 1863, gave people across the nation a fixed point to reckon with, politically and personally.
And that date gave momentum to abolitionist aims and reshaped Union policy and military objectives, anchoring the war to emancipation as a core purpose.
There's a kind of inevitability in that phrasing, Thomas, preliminary yet authoritative, signaling federal intent that couldn't easily be ignored as the war continued.
It also altered international perceptions, underscoring that the Union's cause had a moral dimension tied to emancipation, which influenced diplomacy and support during the conflict.
For enslaved people themselves, the proclamation's effective date represented hope and a concrete promise that change was legally on the horizon.
And for the nation, it marked a legal and symbolic turning point, one that set the path toward universal abolition and, ultimately, the 13th Amendment.
Stay with us. More deep dive ahead. Shifting gears. Today we celebrate the birthdays of Anne of Cleves, 1515, Michael Faraday, 1791, and Billie Piper, 1982.
Anne of Cleves, Michael Faraday, Billie Piper. Quite a span across centuries. Which one shall we sink into for a deeper look?
Let's center on Anne of Cleves today. Her story often gets condensed to a political footnote, but there's more to unpack about her role at Tudor court and how she managed her position after the marriage ended.
Absolutely. Anne of Cleves was Henry VIII's fourth wife, and though that marriage was short-lived, she navigated the aftermath with surprising diplomatic skill and carved out a uniquely secure place for herself at court.
Right, she went from being a foreign bride in a fraught political match to someone who retained respect and even independence within a notoriously perilous royal household. An unusual outcome for the period.
What stands out is her ability to convert what could have been ruin into stability. She remained in England, was granted a generous settlement and residences, and became a well-liked figure. More than a discarded queen consort, really.
The way she conducted herself afterward, calm, composed, and politically savvy, speaks to a kind of agency that's often overlooked in Tudor narratives dominated by drama and dynastic violence.
And culturally, her presence helped shape court life. She maintained ties and influenced domestic affairs in ways that left a softer, but lasting, imprint on the court's social fabric.
I find the contrast compelling. A brief marriage at the center of international politics, followed by a long life in which she exercised influence without overt power. A different kind of legacy.
There are interesting, lesser-known angles, too, like how her retention of property and title allowed her to live independently and maintain a public persona that defied the usual fate of sidelined royal spouses.
That speaks to Tudor statecraft as much as to her personal character, negotiated settlements, reputational management, and the crown's interest in preserving stability. It's a reminder that survival in that era often required savvy diplomacy as much as noble birth.
Exactly. And her example forces us to reassess assumptions about women in the 16th century. Anne of Cleves exercised influence in quieter, but no less real ways.
When you trace the arc from her arrival as a political match to her later role as a respected court figure, you see a narrative of resilience and adaptation, which feels surprisingly modern.
And that modern resonance is why remembering figures like Anne of Cleves matters. She shows how individuals can reshape their circumstances and leave a legacy beyond the headlines of their moment.
Her story endures because it complicates the tidy tales we tell about Tudor power dynamics, reminding us that history is full of negotiation and reinvention.
A lasting legacy, indeed. Anne of Cleves remains a vivid example of survival and influence in a perilous court, and that relevance continues to echo into how we think about agency in history.
Time for a quick pause. We'll explore more when Neural Newscast Deep Dive returns.
Stay tuned to NNC for unbiased daily news summaries. Subscribe and explore our archives at nnewscast.com. This is Neural Newscast.
Thanks for staying with us on Neural Newscast Deep Dive. Let's pivot to our fact of the day. Some individuals express concern about sharing their soap, and for good reason, considering 75% of all people wash from top to bottom.
That 75% figure really reframes it, Andrew. If 3 out of 4 people follow that pattern, hesitation to share a bar makes immediate sense.
Exactly. With a top-to-bottom routine, runoff carries whatever you've scrubbed off downward, increasing the chance of transfer to lower areas. So the caution has a tangible basis.
And from a cultural perspective, even without more data, a single figure that high suggests a behavioral norm. When most people wash that way, communal hygiene and shared items take on different implications.
Right? And you can hear the quick risk calculus. If the sequence moves grime south, a shared bar might carry traces from earlier steps in someone's routine.
There's also a simple spatial logic: gravity and water flow. So for etiquette or safety, knowing that sequence helps you assess whether sharing feels acceptable.
It also explains why some folks are cautious, even if they can't explain the mechanics. The prevalence alone validates the instinct.
Precisely. The statistic becomes a handy reference. 3/4 wash, top to bottom. So opting out of shared soap reads as a reasonable, evidence-supported choice.
So whether it's guest houses, gym showers, or shared bathrooms, keeping that 75% norm in mind is practical when deciding between personal bars, liquid dispensers, or bringing your own.
And that awareness bridges personal preference and public hygiene. Understanding the majority practice gives context to individual choices about sharing soap, making concern not just personal, but broadly sensible. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive. From Andrew and all of us at Neural Newscast, I'm Thomas. Join us next time.
Stay informed beyond the headlines. Visit neuralnewscast.com for daily episodes, specialty shows, deep dive segments, and breaking special coverage. Neural Newscast integrates real and AI-generated voices to facilitate efficient, high-quality news production. Developed by human experts, our AI-generated content undergoes rigorous fact-checking and human review before publication. While we strive for accuracy and neutrality, AI-generated content may occasionally contain errors. We encourage listeners to verify crucial details from reliable sources. For more on our AI transparency practices, visit newscast.com.